I had only been married to Grant Miller for a year, but he was traveling for business more and more often. At first, I didn't pay it much mind, until one day I visited our unused apartment. When I opened the door, a middle-aged woman stood there with a child about 10 years old. She looked at me, visibly surprised. "Who are you?" she asked. But this was my home, paid for by my parents, a house that was supposed to be my husband's. At that moment, her phone rang. She answered, and the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Honey, what do you want? I'll be right back." I knew that voice better than anyone. My husband, Grant, the man who was supposed to be on a business trip. The woman's impatience instantly vanished. Her tone became soft, loving, and sweet. "I want that cinnamon roll from the little cafe near our old university in New York City, and I want flowers. Red roses would be perfect. Oh, and a necklace in the style I like. You know what I mean." I stood there, silent and frozen. It felt as if my body had turned to ice. Grant's university. I knew where that was. Across the city, at least an hour's drive from this apartment. I remembered the early days of our marriage. Once, I had asked him for a cinnamon roll, and his answer was, "I don't like cinnamon rolls." But now his mistress wanted one, and he was willing to drive across the city for it. I heard no hesitation in his voice. "All right, I'll get them for you." My heart sank, but what completely broke me was his next response when she asked for roses, and he agreed. Grant had never bought me flowers during our marriage, not once. He always said he didn't like romantic gestures, they had no meaning. Grant came from humble beginnings. He had worked hard to get into a good university, and after graduating, he had been diligent and frugal. He had a light blue shirt that he wore for years until the color was so faded it was almost white, until the fabric was about to tear, before he finally replaced it. We had known each other for 5 years. He had pursued me for 4. Even after we started dating, he never took me to a fancy restaurant. Most of our meals were fast food. We never celebrated Valentine's Day. Why couldn't he afford it? The only time he gave me flowers was the day he confessed his feelings. A single flower. "You are my one and only." Bought from a roadside flower stand, but it never mattered to me. I had grown up with privilege. Anything I wanted, I could have. I had understood his struggles and never cared about these small details. I had thought he was simply a man who didn't care for romance. It had never occurred to me that he was simply saving his romance for someone else. I stood there, stunned, humiliated, like a stray dog caught in the rain, miserable, drenched, unwanted. So, it wasn't that he was incapable of romance. He simply never wanted to be romantic with me. I saw the woman's eyebrows furrow slightly as I stood silent and unmoving in the doorway. It took a long time for me to process what I had just heard. Then I suppressed my emotions, cleared my expression, and spoke calmly, "Excuse me, wrong door." No accusations, no dramatic confrontations, no claims of possession. I simply turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her grumble, annoyed. "What kind of person rings the wrong doorbell at this hour? Can't people get some peace and quiet?" The door slammed shut. I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I stayed in the neighborhood and casually chatted with some residents taking their evening stroll. After a brief conversation, I asked, "Who lives in apartment 601 in Building 3? The neighbor looked at the building I pointed to and then smiled warmly. "Oh, a nice middle-aged couple. A man and his wife, they seem very much in love." A shiver ran down my spine. It was like being slapped in the face. The woman inside was considered Grant's wife, then. What was I? The neighbor must have noticed my sudden change in expression and asked worriedly, "Are you all right?" I forced myself to calm down and smiled. "I'm fine." Then I excused myself and walked away. Back in my car, I still didn't drive off. Instead, I parked on an inconspicuous corner and sat there slowly, digesting everything I had learned. Then I took out my phone's camera. Grant returned a few hours later. In one hand, he held a cinnamon roll and coffee, in the other, a large bouquet of red roses. He didn't notice me. I was hidden in the shadow of the street corner. He parked in the residence parking lot and went into the building. As soon as he got out of the car, I pressed record. I never called him. I never demanded an explanation. When I returned to the apartment we shared, I pretended as if nothing had happened. Grant came home 2 days later. It was late at night. I was in bed, feigning sleep. He didn't even bother to change his clothes. He still carried the scent of another woman. He got into bed and tried to pull me into his arms.
Camille, I'm home. Is it nothing?
I just turned over, shifted my body to the edge of the bed, leaving no room for him. Perhaps worried about waking me, he didn't push. Instead, he took a quick shower in the guest bathroom and slept there all night. The next morning at breakfast, he spoke as if nothing had happened. This project took longer than expected. I might have to travel more in the future. The company is still young. There's a lot to manage. I want to work hard for our future, Camille. I know it's hard for you, but I hope you understand. I smiled gently and pretended to be understanding. I don't mind. He seemed relieved and finished his meal before going to work. The company, Apex Capital Solutions, was founded by both of us with my parents' funding. Although it had only existed for 2 years, my sharp investment skills had given it a solid start. Grant managed his own department. Therefore, I wasn't much involved in his affairs. That's why I had never noticed anything unusual before. Today, however, I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove to the apartment where Grant was hiding his mistress. I parked and waited. For over an hour. Around 10 a.m., the woman finally appeared, pushing a stroller. She took a taxi and left the neighborhood. I followed her silently. Her destination was a shopping mall. She bought a large amount of children's clothing and toys. When she came out, her hands were full. Bags upon bags of children's items hung from her arms. Unfortunately for her, it had started to rain, and judging by the downpour, it wouldn't stop anytime soon. I sat in my car, watching her stand at the mall entrance, repeatedly trying to hail a taxi, but it was now rush hour. No drivers were available. She looked at the child in the stroller and frowned deeply. The child's face was red from the cold. Her expression became tense, obviously worried. She had no idea how to solve her current dilemma. Just as she seemed on the verge of panic, I slowly pulled up beside her. Do you need help? I rolled down the window, feigning innocence. Delaney Reed turned around, startled, when she saw me. Are you? I pretended not to recognize her and feigned confusion. Do we know each other? She frowned slightly and then reminded me, you rang the wrong doorbell yesterday. Remember? I let out a small O of understanding and smiled politely. Oh right. What a coincidence. Delaney had been waiting for a ride for a long time. The cold wind, the shivering child in the stroller. She must have been desperate. So, when I offered her a ride, she didn't even hesitate. She didn't even wait for an invitation. She simply opened the car door, picked up the child, and slid into the seat beside me. So, could you please take us back to where we were last night? What's ahead? I laughed coldly inside, but outwardly, I just nodded. Of course. As I pulled into traffic, Delaney casually asked, were you visiting a friend in our neighborhood yesterday? Our neighborhood? She really had the audacity. She didn't know that the house she lived in was registered in my name. She truly believed she had a right to it. But I kept my face calm and my tone neutral. Yes. She seemed satisfied with that answer and then continued to speak. Oh, how she spoke. She must have assumed, due to the luxury of my car, that I came from a wealthy family. So, she immediately tried to ingratiate herself. I'm Delaney Reed, she introduced herself enthusiastically. My child is about 10 years old now. His father and I have been together since high school. A very long love story. I felt my fingers clench slightly around the steering wheel. My gaze drifted to the child in the back seat. His face, his eyes, his nose, his jaw, everything Grant. The resemblance was undeniable. Grant was the father of this child, and Delaney had been with him for years. Why then had he pursued me for years? I felt sick. The child was 10 years old, the same amount of time I had been married to Grant. which meant he had gotten her pregnant before our wedding, before our engagement. Even while he was still courting me. Even when he had played the role of a devoted, patient, and romantic admirer for 5 years, he had already been with another woman. He had never been the faithful and loving man I had taken him for. He was simply good at deception, a liar, a cheater, a fraud. And yet I felt nothing, no surprise, no heartache. I had already spent the previous night processing everything. Now my mind was cool, focused, calculating. I turned my head slightly and indifferently picked up my phone, a tap on the screen, and the recording began. "Your child is adorable," I said softly. "He looks more like his father." Delaney beamed at the question, obviously eager to talk. "Oh yes, everyone says he looks very much like his father." "What's his name?" I asked, reaching out to play with the child's tiny toes. "Ethan," she said proudly. "His father named him. He has a company, you know, Apex Capital Solutions." My grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. My gaze drifted to my phone. The recording timer was still running. Perfect. Delaney, oblivious, continued to speak. "Ethan's father and I are the same age, about 50. He already has a business. Isn't that incredible? Back then, he worked very hard to raise funds for his startup. He took on multiple jobs to build his first investment fund. Of course, he's a born businessman. His talent is undeniable." I smiled and just nodded, but internally, I winced for her, because every word she had just said was a lie. Apex Capital Solutions was founded with my parents' money. Grant had never built anything from scratch. He had never had multiple jobs or fought for a single cent. He had never worked his way up. Without me, without my family's support, he would be nothing. And now he had the audacity to make another woman believe he was a self-made man. Pathetic. Delaney raved about Grant for the rest of the ride. She spoke repeatedly about his intelligence, his ambition, his love for her. When we arrived at her apartment, she smiled contentedly, as if she had one. Before she got out, she enthusiastically exchanged contact information with me. She wanted me as a friend. I let her. Then, as she walked away, I calmly took out my phone and saved the entire recorded conversation.
The bite was light.
Now I just had to reel her in. After adding Delaney's contact, I never contacted her first. Instead, I carefully arranged several chance encounters at cafes, jewelry stores, fancy restaurants. Each time I met her, I pretended to be pleasantly surprised. And after enough coincidental meetings, Delaney and I naturally grew closer. Now she even called me friend. She often invited me to dinner with great enthusiasm, as if we had always been close. I had grown up with privilege. Luxury handbags, jewelry were as common to me as everyday necessities. But Delaney initially carried simple, practical bags that only cost a few $100s. Yet, within a week, she had upgraded. Her bags now cost tens of thousands. She rarely wore jewelry. Now she had a designer watch on her wrist, expensive earrings, and a diamond necklace. I knew exactly where the money came from. Delaney didn't have a job. There was only one person funding her new luxury. Grant. Grant had grown up poor. He had always been frugal, careful with money. Sure, he might indulge Delaney, but a woman draped in designer brands, that was beyond his means. When he came home this week, I immediately noticed his foul mood. I didn't ask him why, but later that evening, Delaney sent me a message. "I've been arguing with him a lot lately. I just don't understand it. Men give you everything when they're trying to win you over, but as soon as they have you, they start holding back. I only bought a $50 bag, a $1,500 watch, some diamond earrings, and a necklace. Isn't the point of making money to spend it on women? If you don't spend your money, what's the point of earning it?" She rambled on for a while, mostly about Grant. I patiently read every message, then quietly took screenshots, one after another. I saved every chat where she detailed the amounts he had spent on her. Grant had forgotten. We were still married, which meant every dollar he earned was legally part of our marital assets. If a husband spends marital property without his wife's consent, she can sue him to reclaim it. And by my calculations, That was already over $75,000. Technically, I could have filed for divorce as soon as I discovered his infidelity. But our company complicated things. If I divorced him too early, I would still have to give him half of our joint assets. And for what? He had come into this marriage with nothing. Why should he leave with so much? Not to mention, he would still retain half of the company's management rights and his client list. Since we had always kept our accounts separate, I didn't have direct access to them. I needed time to regain control, and Delaney's message had given me the perfect opportunity. The next day, I set my second step in motion. That evening, Grant was preparing for a business dinner. Just as he finished straightening his tie, I stopped him at the door.
Do you have a client meeting tonight?
I asked casually. Let's go together. Grant froze mid-movement. He obviously hadn't expected me to say that. I didn't bother to explain. I simply closed my files, picked up my bag, and walked ahead of him to the garage. He hesitated and then followed. At dinner, Grant had invited several key clients. Conducting business negotiations had always been my strength. As soon as we were seated, I introduced myself with a smile. I am the true founder of Apex Capital Solutions. I deliberately emphasized true. The clients seemed surprised. To them, Grant had always been the face of the company. Even Grant himself seemed confused by my words. I didn't explain. I simply turned and began to effortlessly chat with the clients like old friends. This was my second step. Before I could remove Grant from the company, I had to first win over his clients. Once they trusted me, he would be replaceable. On the way home, Grant was visibly uneasy. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Camille, have I done something wrong lately?" I kept my gaze on the road and my expression calm. No, I just think Apex Capital Solutions is part of my parents' legacy. I should be more involved. I didn't look at him once. Grant said nothing. It was just a business dinner. Surely, he was just overthinking it, right? Grant thought his doubts were only for me, so I continued the same strategy. For over a month, I accompanied him to all client meetings, and after a month, his clients gradually became our clients. Projects he used to handle alone were now managed jointly. Payments that used to go into his accounts now went into mine. The second step of my plan was complete. What I hadn't expected was that Grant would continue to spend generously on Delaney, even with his dwindling bank balance. That afternoon, as I was about to leave the office, Delaney sent me a message, a series of photos, a luxury mansion. Judging by the look and size of the renovations, it couldn't have cost less than $9 million. Her tone positively vibrated with excitement. "Camille, I have a new house. It's huge. It'll fit me, Ethan, and more people. Isn't it beautiful? I picked it out myself. My taste isn't bad, is it? Today I got the keys. It's fully furnished. I just need to add a few more things before I move in. After 9 years in Chicago, I finally have a worthy home." I stared at our chat history as my fingers clenched around my phone. She was showing off a house bought with my money. She really thought this was something to boast about. Then she called me and invited me for a drink to celebrate. When I arrived at the bar, she was already drunk. She leaned against the counter, her cheeks flushed from alcohol. Her glassy eyes met mine, and then she began to ramble. "Right now, I have everything I've ever wanted, except for one thing. There's someone I just can't let go of. A thorn in my heart, buried deep. Every time I think of her, I feel bad." My instincts sharpened. Something told me she was talking about me. Then suddenly she broke down. With an angry shove, she threw the bottles from the counter. Her eyes went wild. If she didn't exist, Grant and I would be so happy. Her fingers curled around a piece of broken glass, holding it so tightly that it dug into her palm. Blood welled up from the fresh wound, but she didn't even flinch. She kept murmuring the same words. If she didn't exist, if only she didn't exist, why is she alive? She shouldn't be here. A wave of cold ran down my spine. My body stiffened. She really wanted to kill me. For a long time, I had seen Delaney as vain, materialistic, but harmless. It turned out I had been too naive. If she hadn't gotten drunk and poured out her thoughts tonight, I wouldn't have even considered the possibility that she could be cruel. Just to get a man, she wanted to eliminate me. Delaney continued to rant in her drunken state, pouring out her heart about how miserable she had been all those years. You don't know how much I've suffered. For years, I had to watch Grant play house with another woman. I should have been the one by his side. I stared at her and then asked, if you suffered so much, why didn't you leave? There are so many men in the world, why are you so obsessed with this one? She blinked slowly, as if trying to focus through the alcohol. Then she scoffed, why should I leave? Grant being with another woman is just a means to an end. He's doing it for me, to give me a better life. Where else could I find a man who loves me so much? She said it proudly, as if it were something to be proud of, as if cheating, lying, and exploiting another woman's marriage was some kind of romantic gesture. For the second time, Grant and Delaney managed to utterly sicken me. They truly were a perfect pair. I sighed and then asked, have you ever thought? The man you call your own is cheating on another woman for you today. One day, he might do the same to you for someone else. Delaney looked at me stunned. For a moment, she seemed shocked. Then she laughed. That won't happen. Grant loves me. He would never do that to me. I didn't know if she was stupid or just naive. A man who had already cheated once. A man with no loyalty or sense of responsibility. What made her think he was special? I didn't bother to argue. It wasn't worth my time. I didn't offer to drive her home. I didn't care what happened to her tonight. She had already said aloud that she wanted me dead. Why should I show even a glimmer of concern for her well-being? Then I turned and left the restaurant. At first, my plan had only been to remove Grant from the company, but now I had a new priority, to ensure I survived this marital battle. When I got home, Grant was already there. As I walked in, he had just finished a phone call with Delaney. I didn't hear much, just one sentence. I don't care. Just the thought of her makes me die inside. His voice was low and tense. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. A brief moment of panic, but he quickly recovered. He immediately hung up and turned to me with a warm smile. Honey, would you like some tea? His voice was gentle and loving, as always. Had I not known about Delaney, I might have been fooled again. I could have drowned in his false tenderness my whole life. No thanks, I replied curtly, turning towards the study. Or maybe some juice, he continued. You look a bit weak. You should take some vitamins. His attention felt forced, too deliberate, too confusing. I don't want anything. This time, I didn't even lift my head. Grant paused, then after a moment, he went away in silence. A few days later, I brought a small hamster home. Grant seemed surprised when he saw me playing with it. Since when do you like pets? I smiled and gently offered the hamster a piece of lettuce. Isn't he cute? He shrugged. If you like him, keep him. He'll be good company when I'm not home. He didn't pay it much mind. He just took off his jacket and went into the kitchen to prepare dinner. Lately, he had been coming home on time. He used to stay out late, but now every day, right at the end of the workday, he appeared exactly on schedule. He had also become incredibly attentive, always asking about my favorite dishes, cooking comfort food, trying to win me over, but I politely declined each time, claiming to have already eaten with clients. Then I saw him throw away a whole table full of food. Afterwards, he retreated to his study and closed the door behind him. Tonight was the same. I watched him disappear into his study. As soon as the door closed, I turned to the kitchen. My gaze fell on the trash can. I reached in and picked up a vegetable he had thrown away from his dinner. I brought it to my hamster's cage and fed it to him. Nothing happened. The hamster ate normally. In the next few days, I repeated the process. The hamster never showed any symptoms. I started to think I was paranoid. Until 2 weeks later, the hamster vomited blood. I froze as its tiny body convulsed violently and then stopped moving. A wave of cold shot through my body. My body trembled. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the small, lifeless creature. Then I forced myself to move. With trembling hands, I cleaned the cage, packed it up, and threw it in the trash. Afterwards, I started packing my own suitcase. I couldn't stay here any longer. Living with Grant meant living in constant danger. I had to go. Dragging my suitcase, I went to the front door. Just as I reached the handle, Grant's study door opened. He looked at my luggage. For a brief second, his face was blank with surprise. Then he asked, "It's very late.
Where are you going?"
My hand froze on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. I could feel my own face. Pale, chillingly pale. "What's wrong?" Grant walked towards me. Before he could get too close, I opened the door and stepped out. I collected myself before replying calmly, "I've been feeling exhausted lately. The back and forth is a hassle. I'm staying with my parents for a few days." "Why?" Grant's voice was full of concern. "Is it because I haven't been home enough? If you don't want to drive, wait for me. I'll drive you myself." He was still playing the perfect husband. "No need," my voice was calm and firm. "You have enough to do. Besides, my parents' house is closer to the office, which makes things easier." I pulled my suitcase forward, making it clear I didn't want to discuss it further. "Camille," just as I was about to leave, Grant grabbed my wrist. "Give me a reason. If you're feeling overwhelmed, let's take a break together. We can go to the Caribbean for a week and relax. Money isn't everything. It will never run out. I should spend more time with you." Had he said that to me earlier, it might have moved me, but now the more considerate he acted, the more disturbed I became. Perhaps, when things have settled down. I didn't flat out refuse and continued to play along. That was enough to appease him. He released my hand and smiled. "Well, we'll talk about that later. For now, get some rest at your parents' place." I didn't dare to look at him. Pulling my suitcase, I left the apartment without hesitation, got into my car, and drove away. I couldn't stay there any longer. I went to the office the next morning as usual. Grant was in the private bathroom connected to his office. His phone lay on his desk outside. The screen lit up with an incoming message. I wasn't the type to snoop, but my eyes naturally drifted to the screen, and the name in the notification caught my attention. Delaney. I had no doubt. It was Delaney. The message preview appeared on the screen. "Are you having doubts? Do you really feel something for her?" My heart pounded. Before I could fully process the words, another message appeared. "If you can't, let me do it." My blood ran cold. I grabbed his phone. My fingers turned white with pressure. Delaney, what exactly was she planning to do? I wanted to open the chat to see everything they had discussed, but the phone was locked with a passcode. I tried common combinations. Our anniversary, his birthday. Nothing worked. I squeezed the phone and looked towards the bathroom. The door was closed. No sound of flushing. Grant hadn't come out yet. I racked my brain for possibilities, and then a memory flashed through my mind. Delaney had once posted a photo of a necklace on social media. A gift from Grant. She had even zoomed in on the engraving, a series of numbers. I had always had an almost photographic memory. Even if I had only glanced at something, I could remember it later. I closed my eyes and visualized the numbers on that necklace. I wrote them down and combined them with Grant's birthday. The screen unlocked. I had guessed correctly. I unlocked Grant's phone with trembling fingers and hurried to open his contacts before he came out of the bathroom. I clicked on his chat with Delaney. The entire conversation history was deleted, except for today's messages. The last message Grant had sent was at 9:30 a.m. It was just one sentence. "Enough. I think this is too much already." My grip on the phone tightened. Something in me screamed. The previous conversation must have been crucial, but he had deleted it. Yet Delaney's reply had just arrived. "Are you having doubts? Do you really feel something for her?" Then another message immediately followed. "If you can't, let me do it." I froze, staring at the screen. Delaney, what did she mean by do it? Grant had backed out of any plan they had if he felt guilty. But that hamster, the dead hamster that vomited blood, which meant he had already made his move. Unless the poison wasn't meant to kill me directly, but to cause something else, another kind of harm. Either way, it didn't matter, because by this point, Grant was beyond any forgiveness. I quickly took screenshots of their conversation and saved them. Then, before Grant could come out, I calmly placed his phone on the desk and left his office. He was about to lose everything, and I was about to make my next move. That morning, I sent a notification to the entire company. Later that same day, a mandatory meeting would be held, but I didn't specify the agenda. At 10:30 a.m., all employees arrived and waited in the conference room, including Grant. I walked in, carrying nothing but my phone. Eyes widened in confusion. No one knew what was about to happen. I walked to the front of the room and surveyed the crowd. Then I spoke. This meeting is to inform you that, as of today, I will be solely responsible for Apex Capital Solutions. Effective immediately, Grant Miller is no longer part of this company. The room fell silent in stunned disbelief. Then shock rippled through the crowd. A mixture of whispers and gasps filled the room, and the most stunned was Grant himself. "Camille, what are you doing?" His face darkened instantly, and his voice dropped with barely concealed rage. I ignored him. Instead, I raised my phone and mirrored the screen onto the projector in the conference room. First, a slideshow of Delaney and her child. Then screenshots of my conversations with Delaney, the detailed breakdown of how much Grant had spent on her. Every luxury item, every expense. Then the recorded conversation in which Delaney explicitly stated, "The child's father is Grant." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, then utter outrage. Miller had a mistress and a secret child. He was spending company money on them, but he always seemed so devoted to his wife. This shows how little we really knew about him. Grant's face was pale with rage, his eyes fixed on the screen. I didn't spare him a glance. Instead, I continued. Everyone here knows that Apex Capital Solutions was founded with my parents' investment. Grant has no stake in this company, and if someone needs to be thrown out, my parents have the final say. I am here to inform you of their decision. Grant Miller is no longer needed in this company. Furthermore, every dollar he spent on his mistress was company money. I will initiate legal proceedings to reclaim every cent. With that, I turned and walked to the exit without looking back. But Grant pursued me and grabbed my wrist. He hissed, "Camille, why didn't you talk to me first? We could have handled this privately. Why make it a public spectacle?" His grip was tight, and he could barely restrain his frustration. I stared at him, then slowly freed my hand. "Talk? Handle things privately." I laughed, a cold, high sound. "Do you think this situation deserved a private discussion? From the moment you approached me, you had an agenda.
You uzme, you lied to me.
You cheated on me. Now you want to handle things discreetly to look good." I took a step back. "I have nothing more to say to you. Tomorrow, I'll have the divorce papers ready. You'll receive them soon." And then I walked away. Grant didn't follow me this time. He remained frozen, his hand still partially outstretched, as if reaching for something that was no longer there. His expression burned with rage, but deeper than that, there was something else. Something like helplessness, because he had never expected me to be so resolute. He had never thought I had been preparing my move all along. I had left him no room for defense. Not long after I returned to my office, Delaney called me. She had obviously already heard what had happened. The moment I picked up, she began a tirade. "You're Grant's wife. You deceived me from the beginning. You didn't fool me. You played with my feelings, just for this moment. How can a woman be so manipulative?" She barely paused to breathe before continuing in her resentful voice. "All right. I admit I liked Grant, but he wasn't bad to you either. Did you really have to ruin it like this? Do you realize that publicly humiliating him in front of the entire company doesn't just damage his reputation? You've made it impossible for him to get a high-paying job elsewhere. How are we supposed to support our family now?" I listened patiently to every word. Then, in a calm and composed voice, I replied, "Delaney, you never asked me if I knew Grant. I never lied to you. You just assumed. Everything I revealed today, every word came from your own mouth. Grant is suffering the consequences of his own actions, not mine. And let's be clear, when you two were secretly sneaking around, ruining lives, did you feel ashamed? No. So why do you expect me to feel guilty just because I revealed the truth? Lastly, why should I care what happens to you and Grant now? Do you really think it's my responsibility to support my ex-husband and his mistress after the divorce?" My voice remained flat and emotionless the entire time. Delaney, however, lost her composure. She screamed and cursed at me for almost 10 minutes. I had no intention of wasting my time on her tantrum. So, I hung up in the middle of her speech, but my plan wasn't over yet. Kicking Grant out of the company was just the first step. I still had the voice recording of Delaney's drunken confession, the screenshots of her messages, and of course, the evidence of the poisoned hamster. I wasn't in a hurry. One thing I knew for sure. Delaney hated me, and a woman like her wouldn't just let that go. Eventually, she would make her move, and when she did, I would be ready. A month later, I sued Grant to reclaim every dollar he had spent. Simultaneously, our divorce proceedings began. Grant tried to demand a 50-50 split of our assets, but I had already foreseen that. Apex Capital Solutions legally belonged to my parents. Everything we earned before the marriage was not subject to division, and since he was the guilty party in the divorce, the court ruled against him. In the end, Grant left with only $750,000. For Delaney, however, that wasn't enough. She had grown accustomed to luxury, and Grant had always had money problems. Even before the lawsuit, Delaney's spending habits were a strain on him. A few days after the financial agreement was finalized, half the money was already gone. Delaney had spent it all on designer handbags, jewelry, and luxury items. Within a month, they were completely broke. At first, Grant tried to endure it, but he was no longer the same man. He had lost his career, his reputation, and was now trapped with a woman who spent money like water. The arguments started immediately. Delaney complained about the lack of money. Grant sharply criticized her reckless spending. It wasn't long before he broke up with her. The so-called true love that Delaney so desperately believed in, the soulmate romance for which he had cheated on me. It didn't even reach the finish line. After Grant and Delaney broke up, they disappeared from my life. I never saw them again. Until late one night. I was driving home from work on a deserted road when Delaney's taxi passed me. She was in the passenger seat, and as our eyes met through the window, I saw malice light up in her gaze. I ignored it. I kept driving. Delaney's taxi should have driven on, but just as it reached the intersection, it suddenly turned sharply and then sped towards me at full throttle. The car's headlights grew brighter and brighter in my rearview mirror. Through the flickering light, I saw Delaney wresting the steering wheel from the driver. Her face was contorted with rage. I barely heard her voice over the wind. "It's your fault, Camille. You should die." Her car accelerated. She was going to ram me. I had expected this. Delaney wasn't the type to let go of her hatred so easily. So, just before impact, I made a sharp turn and swerved out of the way. Delaney tried to follow me, still fighting the driver for control, but the taxi was too fast. The driver wrenched the wheel back, desperately trying to stop her. And in their struggle, the car veered off the road. Crash. The taxi slammed into a thick tree trunk. Everything went silent. I stopped my car. The taxi was completely destroyed. Neither Delaney nor the driver moved. Someone nearby called 911. The police arrived, and both Delaney and the driver were taken to the hospital. I went to the police station to give my statement. And before we left, I handed over all my evidence, the recordings, the chat logs, everything. Delaney was in a coma for a whole week. When she finally woke up, her brain was damaged. She wasn't entirely gone, but her thinking was slow. She was no longer the woman she once was. I filed charges for attempted murder. The security footage of the accident and all my previous evidence sealed the case. Delaney was found guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison. I only gave the police part of my evidence against Grant, but they still found a lot, and from their investigation, I finally learned the whole story. Delaney had pressured him for months. She had suggested taking me on an overseas trip and staging an accident, faking a car crash, setting our house on fire while I slept. Grant refused everything, but he agreed to the poison. He had only given me a dose that caused confusion and disorientation. Enough to make me mentally unstable, but not enough to kill me. He had tested it on the hamster first. He had watched it die and still gave it to me. He was arrested for attempted assault and reckless endangerment. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. On his first day in prison, he asked to see me. I went, not because it mattered to me, but because I wanted to hear what he had to say. He had lost weight. His face looked tired and hollow. His eyes held something they never had before, regret. You know why I rejected Delaney's plans? His voice was hoarse. I didn't answer. He looked at me, his gaze searching, his lips trembling slightly. Camille, if I told you I really loved you, would you believe me? I had known the answer to that question for a long time. I never wondered if he loved me or not, because it didn't matter. Everything he ever did was for himself. Even if his love had been genuine, it was worthless. I took a deep breath. Then, in a cold and firm voice, I replied, Mr. Miller, your love is too cheap for me. I will not visit you again, and when you get out, we will have no reason to see each other. I turned and walked away without looking back. After that, I poured everything I had into my work.
Apex Capital Solutions flourished.
With Grant gone, the company performed better than ever. A few years later, I became one of the youngest entrepreneurs on the city's wealth list. My parents tried to set me up on blind dates, but I always declined them. Marriage was not a necessity. I would let fate decide. What truly mattered was strength, success, and the ability to provide for myself. I had everything I needed. And for the first time in my life, everything was exactly as it should be. If you enjoyed my story, please consider supporting me by leaving a like or subscribing for more stories. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments below. Until next time.